Hi, boys and girls. This is we're moving on to lesson 7 today, and we're going to be taking a closer look at daily Roman life. This is part 2, and this is on activity book 7.1. What I would like you to do right now is go back to, before we get started on this, go back to activity book 6.1. And take a look at what you wrote there about what it was like to be in a plebeian family in ancient Rome and what their daily life was like. So pause the video, take a moment, go back and read over that, and then come on back. Welcome back. So today we're going to talk about what it was like to be in a patrician family in daily Roman life in ancient Rome. And we are going to be using your reader. So you need to get your reader out and open up to chapter 8, Daily Roman Life in the City, part 2. And as we read, I'm going to pause, and you should pause the video so that you can write down what you need to write down. So we're going to get started on pages 72 and 73, and I'm going to read to you. And on pages 72 and 73, you're going to be listening for question number 1. So this is on 72 and 73. So if you want to go back and look at your reader again, you can. What would it have been like to be born and raised in a patrician family? I need you to write down 3 things in this box. So as I'm reading, you can listen, you can pause the video, but you need to write down 3 things in this box. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's imagine that you are a child in a wealthy patrician family. Like most patrician families, you live in a large house known in Latin as domus. The domus has several stories with enough rooms for your large family. Mother, father, children, grandparents, dozens of slaves, and several aunts, uncles, and cousins. It is common to find the family gathered in the atrium, a large open, I lost my place, sorry, a large open space in the middle of the domus. So the atrium is a large open space. An atrium features a skylight or hole in the roof, which creates a bright atmosphere and helps air circulate through the house. If you look closely at the floor, you can see a shallow pool of water in the middle of the atrium. This pool is there to collect rainwater because there's no way to close the skylight. The little pool is also a good place to rinse your feet if they are dusty from the streets. So go ahead and write down anything that you heard about being born and raised in a patrician family. And we're going to continue on page 73. Whether they were plebeians or patricians, all Roman families were organized in a similar way. While many families consisted only of parents and children, it was also very common to find many relatives living together in the same apartment building, if not in the same house. Everyone, from grandparents to slaves, was considered to be part of the family. The oldest man in the family was called in Latin the pater familias, and he was in charge. By law, the pater familias had control over the family's property and money, and he made all the family decisions. He might have arranged whom his children would marry before they were even adults. So go ahead and write your 3 things in box number 1. What would it have been like to be born and raised in a patrician family? Make sure you have the 3 things written down. So we're going to move on to pages 74 and 75. And in this one, we're going to list the rights that women did not have in ancient Roman society. And we're going to list the rights that ancient Roman women did have in society. So I'm going to do a little T chart here. Remember our little T chart from before? and I'm going to write did not have. So these are rights that women did not have, and these are rights that they did have. So go ahead and write that on your box for number 2, and listen carefully as I read. Roman women were not allowed to vote or run for the Senate or other offices. Well, there I just heard a couple of rights that they don't have. Did not have the right to vote, did not have the right to run for Senate or other offices, so they couldn't be in the government at all. Women were expected to do whatever the pater familias told them to do. Nevertheless, Roman women did have some rights that women in many other civilizations did not have at the time. Roman women were allowed to own property, so there were many women involved in business. So they did have the right to own property. That's awesome. They could own property. Roman women were usually deeply involved in important decisions involving the home. So there's another one. Family decisions. So they were involved in making family decisions with the pater familia, which is kind of, I thought it said that he made all the decisions, but I guess that women can give input to that. Patrician women were often moneylenders or landlords, meaning they owned and managed properties in which others paid to live. So that goes along with owning property that they could rent out to other people. Most plebeian women had their hands full with domestic duties, which means at home, which included raising children, cooking, and cleaning. They may have also carried on a trade, such as selling food in the market. Wealthy plebeian and patrician women had slaves to do the work for them. Much of their time was spent managing their slaves. The richest families sometimes had hundreds of slaves to manage. I'm going to put down here, it says there that they could sell food in the market. So I'm going to put job outside of home. Job outside home. So they were allowed to work outside of the home. Mostly because they had slaves that would do their housework and take care of their children at home. Okay, let's move on to number 3. Actually, not yet. There's a little bit more about just Roman life in general, but you don't need to write anything down for number 3 yet. Patrician families and friends loved to gather for long, relaxing meals. They would sometimes eat for hours, nibbling at their food, drinking wine, and sharing all the latest stories they had heard around town. Rich patricians liked to recline on dining couches during meals, so they liked to lay back and eat their meals. Sometimes they would lie on their stomachs. At least they didn't have to worry about spilling food on their laps. People often ate with their fingers, no need for a fork or spoon, unless they were eating soup. On an average night, however, most plebeian families usually did not have time for long suppers. They probably sat around a table on stools, and their food usually wasn't very elaborate. A typical plebeian family would eat bread and porridge made of grain, along with small helpings of meat and whatever vegetables they had on hand. As the population living in Rome grew, the city became more and more crowded. Although plebeians had opportunities to make money and own property, life was not easy for most of them. Because Rome relied so much on grain shipments being imported, meaning bringing in from somewhere else, from across the sea, sometimes there was a food shortage, so not enough to feed everyone. War and bad weather sometimes delayed those food shipments from arriving at the wharves, and Rome would suddenly become an angry city of thousands of hungry people. Disease was a big problem too. Romans worked hard to try to keep the city clean, but it was an impossible situation with so many people. As a result, horrible diseases sometimes spread throughout the population. The life of patricians, we're on page 77 now. The life of patricians might have seemed easy compared to the lives of plebeians and slaves. But that doesn't mean the patricians didn't have worries. Patricians were the wealthy elite in Roman society, but there were not as many of them as there were plebeians. As time passed, the ordinary people of Rome, or the mob, as the patricians called them, began to understand that they had power in their numbers. Riots became common. People would rampage through a city, burning and trashing buildings and generally creating chaos. People rioted most often when there were food shortages. Not surprisingly, this always made the patricians very nervous. The patricians always had plenty of food, and the plebeians knew it. The patricians valued their high position in society and felt threatened that the protests of the many plebeians could eventually change their status. So, moving on, we're going to now listen to for answers for number 3. So we're on to pages 78 and 79. How did the Roman government try to solve some of the problems of city life? You need to write down 2 details, 2 things that you learn about this. How did the Roman government try to solve their problems? So these problems of food shortage and people getting angry and rioting and causing chaos. So page 78. So the wealthy Romans came up with a plan that is sometimes called bread and circuses. The idea was basically to distract people from their problems by staging amazing spectacles. This was part of the reason why buildings like the Circus Maximus and the Colosseum were built. Don't forget, as I'm reading, pause the video and write down your 2 details for number 3. I'm not doing it for you. Just when the mobs were starting to get restless and wanting to start a riot, the Senate and other patricians would pay for a couple weeks of games to distract unhappy citizens. Usually, these games involved chariot races, fights among people and animals, and circus tricks involving trained animals, acrobats, jugglers, and other entertainers. If you have ever been to a circus under a big top tent, then you can thank the Romans because they were one of the first to do it. Of course, our circuses are far tamer than the Roman circuses. Instead of having a lion jump through a hoop, they had lions fighting people. Oh my goodness. All right, so go ahead and write down your 2 things from that section for number 3, how the government tried to solve some of the problems. Now, turn to the back to number 4. As I'm finishing up the reading, you want to think about what are the main ideas of today's read aloud. Write 1 or 2 sentences. What would you tell? What the big ideas? What were we supposed to learn about in this chapter? The ultimate spectacles took place in the great amphitheater you have heard about called the Colosseum. Here, gladiators would fight each other for the public's entertainment. Gladiators were often criminals or soldiers that had been captured from enemy armies. Though rare, there were also women fighters called gladiatrices. Believe it or not, some people chose the life of a gladiator for the fame. Gladiators were sometimes forced to fight each other to the death in front of thousands of people. Many gladiators did not live very long. One appearance in the arena was all they got. Roman games were not for the faint of heart. And finally, pages 80 and 81. Think about the life in Rome from a Roman's perspective. They lived in an incredible city, and they had all kinds of opportunities. But life was still very hard. War, disease, and hunger were always life's obstacles. Medicines and medical care such as we know today did not exist in ancient Rome. The Roman legions marched all over the world with countless Roman soldiers never to be seen or heard from again. At any moment, a foreign army could invade Roman homes, carrying citizens away to a life of slavery. Life for most people during Roman times was short and brutal. They loved their families, but many Romans did not really expect to live a very long life. For all their inventions and immense power, the Romans could not change the fact that their lives were uncertain and dangerous. So you should have all of Activity Book 7.1 filled out. Do not turn this in with blank spaces in numbers 1, 3, and 4. You are completing those. Go back and reread or listen again if you need to.